You are blocked out for just a second, so I need to make sure that your picture is still showing. Your
Okay,
camera's
because I
missing.
don't see myself in the
Right.
little thing.
Okay. Can you hit camera down on the bottom? Because I can't do it on my side.
Okay. Start my video. And
I'm just gonna start and we'll see if you come on and that'll be fine. Your name is
okay, because mine has a red X through the or line through the start video.
sure.
So I'm looking here.
Okay.
It says, okay, well, you start and see if I come up.
Sure. Okay. Hey everyone, welcome back to Be Not Afraid. Today my guest is Micheal Cross, and Micheal has taught psychology for over 30 years. I wanted to bring him on because I have just really been thinking about and really kind of been crushed, as many of us have, with what's been going on in Israel, but it really draws back to the work that I've been doing with ethnic studies and how it is that we get a generation or multiple generations of people who will celebrate just the worst of society. How did we get here? So, Micheal, I'm so grateful to have you on. And we can't see you, but that's okay. We can at least hear you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And that's a huge field in reference to why we're here. Why is it that such a huge percentage of younger millennials and Gen Z in the United States, but even worse in like England, Australia, places like that, are where they're at today? In fact, I would say that maybe they are far more radical in many respects than the Bolsheviks pre-Soviet Union revolution in 1917 were. And there's a variety of reasons, and we could start. Would you like to start with me at least giving a background into the leadership that has brought us here? And in that sense, I would like to talk a little bit about psychopathy.
That sounds great. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, now, first of all, if I say psychopath, I know what people are thinking in their minds. They're thinking of TV shows.
Right.
They're thinking of Hannibal Lecter eating someone for dinner. They're thinking of characters such as Dexter, even though technically he's not a psychopath, but that's what they're thinking. You know, the TV version, the guy in his basement with newspaper clippings on the wall about him and the police trying to catch him. And that is not an accurate representation for psychopaths. Okay? Psychopaths are more like, and this is going to surprise people because they're going to be like, what is he talking about? A psychopath is more like a character from, James Bond. James Bond is a archetypical psychopath. He's, of course, what you would call a pro-social psychopath because he has reined his lack of emotions and lack of guilt in the service of MI6. So he, even though a lot of times he breaks away from the service of his country, he comes back because this gives him a certain ethical foundation to base his life on. But nevertheless, he is a psychopath. There's characters like almost every character portrayed in the British TV series that was on until recently, Killing Eve. Everyone starts out with thinking the assassin is a psychopath. But then you later, as time goes on, you realize that the woman who's the investigator, who's become infatuated with her, is also a psychopath. And so is her boss. And so is, I mean, the thing is, that people have to realize that there's pro and anti-social psychopaths. Anti-social psychopaths are the people who you watch on some true crime show. They're the ones who go out and murder and bury people in their basement and that sort of thing. John Wayne Gacy's and so forth. On the other hand, the pro-social psychopaths are the people you see when they show State of the Union addresses. And you see all the Congress and the Senate. Now, not all of them. Some of them are malignant narcissists. And some of them may make it through the system, without being those things. But their traits, as a study a few years ago showed, serial killers and politicians share the same personality traits. And and when you watch Hollywood awards ceremonies, nowadays, a lot of people, if you actually still watch those things, are probably wondering, I wonder which one of these Hollywood celebrities is on Epstein's island visit list. That's something that's to consider, in a society where we've made Russell Brand and Donald Trump and stuff into the bad guys. But we realize Epstein had hundreds, if not thousands, of clients going to an island to have sex with young children, essentially. And none of them are in jail. None of them are being raided by the FBI. None of them are being asked by the British Parliament to be demonetized on social media.
And do you believe that that's, I'm going to be blunt here, I generally am, but do you think that that is because we're under some sort of a coup?
Well, psychologically, yes, but that's a psychology that has existed since the Roman era and probably existed back if you go back to Noah's time. Human beings, as Machiavelli, by the way, reading that short book, The Prince by Machiavelli, gives you better insights into the political mind of America than any other book. But, Machiavelli's known for saying the ends justify the means. He went into a lot more details than that. But one thing he said in that book is few people, if you're a leader, few people can touch you, but many people can see you. And that means in a leader's life, be it a Hillary Clinton or someone like that, everyone knows who Hillary Clinton is. And they see her pictures. She's always nicely dressed. She's obviously very intelligent and so forth. They see these things, but do they really know who she is? What is she in the background? Who are her true alliances and friends and so forth? And this is where Machiavelli says image means more than anything. And the media works along with this. If you want to demonize someone, the media will do it for you. If you want to glamorize someone, the media will do it for you. And the thing is, the reason why I just want to spend a few minutes on psychopathy is there's just a few traits I would really strongly encourage people. Look up the traits of psychopaths. Don't just go out there and just read articles, but actually the Robert Hare's traits for psychopaths. There's 20. Just a few of them are glib and superficial flattery, which works along with charisma. A politician needs that trait. You can be very wonderful as a person and run for office, but if you don't have that particular trait to be able to go up to someone, even if you don't really like them or even know them, and shake hands with them and start pretending like they're the center of your universe, then you're not going to get anywhere. Another trait that's very good for people who have these traits and to progress in politics is the ability to, well, it's not an ability, it's just they're prone to boredom. Okay, they need excitement. There's some of us Doesn't mean you're psychopathic. There's some of us that love to be in front of the camera or love to be in front of a huge crowd of people and to talk to them. Many people, I used to have a boss that said she could call me at 2 a.m, have me come before several hundred people and just give me a topic, and I would have them, listening. Think about what it's like for a politician to have to go in front of a crowd of 20,000 people, know the media is watching you, every word you say, and to enjoy that, and then go on an airplane and go to another city and speak for 20,000 people, and then go to another event and another event, another. I've seen many pictures of Barack Obama. He's never happier unless he's in front of a huge crowd. He has a persona. Now, I don't think he's a psychopath. I think he's like Justin Trudeau. He's a narcissist, malignant narcissist. But the thing is, in that case, there's an overlap.
I would need to know what the full definition of a psychopath is, because
a psychopath is someone who, if you just go by the basics, they have no sense of guilt. They can have sense of disappointment. Like, if they were to get in a car wreck because they were being clumsy and it injures their child, they will feel like they have done something bad. They shouldn't have been glancing off the road or something, but they're going to blame something else. Why did someone make that phone that caught my attention so much that I was looking at my phone? Why did someone at that party offer me a drink knowing that I'd already had a drink? They will not feel guilt, like that personal, oh my gosh,
project it to someone else, is what you're saying.
It's always someone else. You project your feelings. That's going to become very important here as we talk about tribalism. They project their feelings onto someone else.
Right.
And then on top of that, they don't have empathy. Now, again, one of the occupations, aside from politics and entertainment, that attracts psychopaths and malignant narcissists, but let's just talk about psychopaths right now, is emergency room doctors and surgeons. Now, people are thinking, oh my gosh, how can that be? My doctor I go to, he's so nice, or she's so nice. Studies show that your everyday general practitioner has a very low level of psychopathy. But people that are specialists in fields like surgery and emergency room, they're different. They're a different breed of people. And I've talked to many nurses that work with these people, and saying that, oh yeah, they are definitely. Now, the thing is, they can feel sympathy. You go in there, your child cut their hand off, playing with a lawnmower. Now, they can feel very bad, especially if they have a child. They'd be like, wow, that's really horrible. What happened? Oh, that's horrible. But they won't feel it. Okay? Now,
so you can be, this is personal for me, because I have a child who feels like that's kind of his way of being, but you can be that kind of person and still be a kind, good person, correct?
Yes, and in fact, I want to make sure that people understand this, because I've interviewed psychologists when I had a podcast. I need to get that going again. That a psychopath can be a very good parent, because in their world, they will have love for what's called first-degree relatives. Okay? They can very much love their children, and believe me, mess with their kid. I remember watching an interview with Richard Kuklinski, and he was kind of a mafia hitman / serial killer. And the psychologist asked him if he cared about anyone, and Kuklinski said he could kill every single person in that room right there, camera people, psychologists, everyone, if they in any way, shape, or form threatened his child. In fact, he killed his best friend when his best friend had made a comment about they were arguing over some sort of bill, and his friend said, "Well, I know where you live." His friend didn't live very long after that. He disposed of him in a very creative way. But the thing is that when it comes to the children, they can also have very strong feelings. And I say this because it always throws people off, because you have to think about it. They can have very strong feelings for their wife and their mistress. So it can be this situation where they have very strong feelings there. But let's say their wife files for divorce. They can shut those feelings off instantaneously. Now, that's a trait they do have. Most people cannot do that. A psychopath, if they feel betrayed, can turn the off switch on immediately. So if there's a case where the wife, or if it's a woman, people forget that women can be psychopaths too. The husband dies in a car wreck. They could be thinking, well, that's really sad. Who's going to help me take care of the kids? Who's going to do this? Who's going to be with me? Well, let's think about this for a moment. I could call, and it's immediately. It's not like grieving process people talk about when someone dies. Maybe you should just take some time and get used to it. That grieving process does not exist in a psychopath.
So what makes someone that? Are they born that way, or
Yes.
Is it you are born that way?
You see, a lot of
Can you
times people
develop
think.
those traits?
See, a lot of times people think like the very related concept of narcissism is something that is promoted by TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. Those people that are like taking their pictures and trying to get a lot of celebrity status, many of those are wannabe narcissists. And what I mean by that is they are people who may show those kind of traits, but deep down they're not. A malignant narcissist, the only difference between a malignant narcissist and a psychopath is that the malignant narcissist cares what people think about them. So if you have a Hollywood celebrity and there's this is very common, a sex tape is released.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because they released it, but let's just say they're claiming that, oh my gosh, someone stole this from, whatever, it's happened so many times. A narcissist, if it is stolen, let's just say it is stolen or released by an ex, the narcissist is going to be like, oh my gosh. And they're going to feel like, what's my family going to think about this? What's my friends going to think about this? The psychopath is going to be going, this could really advance me. They don't have that sense of, their care is based on, will it benefit them or hurt them in that?
Okay, so if they're not trained, like if you weren't born this way, then what I'm wondering is how this is going to fit into what we're seeing today.
Okay.
Because it seems to me like we're training people, we're training
We
our
are.
younger generation to have these kind of, how does this benefit me only goals.
Yeah, it's very similar to, there was a guy, I can't remember, it's a really long, complicated Polish name. He wrote the book Political Ponerology. He was a professor in Poland during the communist era. Okay. And he talked about what he called secondary psychopaths. And those are people who, again, they're not psychopaths. They have just accepted certain ways of behaving in order to get ahead. It would be like a soldier who's trained in special ops or CIA or something, and they kill someone, they assassinate them. A secondary will feel a sense of remorse later. They'll be like, oh my gosh, what have I done? They might even suffer PTSD. Whereas a true psychopath will be like, well, that was number 17. My competition's at 21. Maybe I'll get some good assignments in the future and be able to pass him or her. That's the way they think. Okay. What I call a wannabe narcissist is someone who still feels empathy. See, psychopaths and narcissists don't feel empathy or guilt. And so if they're brought up on something, if they're challenged, they can still feel like, what did I do wrong? And it can go beyond just the feelings of how will this affect my audience, how people see me. They'll feel bad deep down. So that's the only difference between psychopaths and narcissists.
So if I ask you about Hamas,
Hmm?
those people probably weren't born naturally hating to the point that they would do the atrocities that we just saw. And also that goes with Antifa as well. I've seen Antifa kids who are before, like they're before a couple of years or even months before, say 2020, they were normal and healthy and happy. At
Hmm?
least they appeared that way. And then they came to the point where they can blow up buildings,
Hmm?
or assault people on the street. And they seem, from what I saw in their eyes, they seemed very vacant, um,
Hmm?
almost like they were brainwashed. That's
Yep.
that's so if you can't become a psychopath, wouldn't those tendencies be the psychopath? Because what I have not seen, um, you will see lots of people who go from the left and talk about why they're on the right now, but you don't see a lot of people who say why I left Antifa.
Hmm? Okay, here's the reason. If people get a chance, even though he really takes religion to task, he was agnostic, an agnostic Jew. Sigmund Freud. You can find his book. It's a short one too. It's like The Prince, very short. It's on the internet, PDF. You can find Civilization and Its Discontents, where he talks about this very thing. And before I get into Civilization and Its Discontents to explain Antifa and Hamas, I would note that I once had a student that did a really long report on Charles Manson. Now, I was one of those people that originally thought Charles Manson was this kind of crazy guy who just was able to bring people together and do crazy things. But then I started reading all the details about Charles Manson, who was a high school dropout. He was in prison and he claims he read a book on self-help by Norman Vincent Peale. And that's where he learned all of his stuff. No, no, and no. His knowledge of brainwashing was incredible. And and then I'll come back to Civilization. What Manson would do is he didn't just go some crazy place and pick up some drugged out hippie from the 60s. He could have gone down to Haight Ashbury, had his pick. He went to college campuses and he would go into, remember, this guy is this short. I mean, he was not tall. He was a little guy, not particularly handsome. He would go into a college cafeteria. Those of you who've been to college or university, you know what it looks like. Go in, it's busy. People are sitting around. Some are studying, some are talking. That's right. He knew how to zero in on someone and know that person is someone I can manipulate. He would get them, start love bombing them, tell them how wonderful they were, and so forth. Eventually, just like in a cult, I remember there was one, I won't name the name. There was one particular cult I was invited in high school. I visited their booth at the fair. And they were like, "Oh, we have this really wonderful weekend retreat." And, my friend was like, "We should go just to see what it's like." And then I realized they don't let you sleep or do anything like that. So they're brainwashing you in the process. But one of the things that Manson would do is he would find out what kinds of things made that person who they were. And what I mean by that is, what did they like? But most importantly, what made them feel bad? Okay. So let's say he's talking to some young woman and she says she feels really guilty because a year early, maybe she'd been active in her church. A year earlier, she had gone too far with a guy in the back of a car. So he finds out, oh, she's very much feeling guilt for having sex. He would then arrange it. So she comes to the commune. They interact. She interacts with all these new friends. And then he has sex with her in front of all these new friends on stage. Now, what this is intended to do is to shatter her ego meaning who she is, shatter the ego. And then, now that it's broken, all her new friends can now rebuild it. And she's going to feel very bad about family. You know, what's the family going to think? He had one particular case where a girl was just like, she was a little bit more strong, and she was like, well, my father would kill me. So he arranged it where he was actually able to persuade the father to come to the commune, and then he had sex with the father.
Okay.
Now, of course, this shattered her.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why, and he did all these other things, but everything was designed to shatter the ego and rebuild it. And this is why the more I started studying about Manson, I started finding weird connections to MK Ultra.
Okay.
It just seemed like, wait a minute, this is there was a couple psychologists that were paid $80 freaking million to design a way to break people at Gitmo for the US government. It got me mad because in one of my books I had described a lot of these techniques, and I sure wasn't paid any $80 million by the US government to break people.
So you studied how to brainwash people?
You can find stuff. And one of my books, it was a fiction. If you know any people that, because I didn't republish. So if you know anyone out there that likes conservative based, but also very accurate thrillers, just, they can send you a message there. Okay. But anyway, there was one in which I described the main character having a lot of these strategies used on her. And temporarily breaking her. If you actually study brainwashing techniques, you can go through and you can find this kind of stuff. I mean, the US government has used it. Of course, they were saying, most people freak out when you say, oh, did you know the reason for the LSD and the hippie movement was the CIA?
Well, that was the same with when they brought it into the African American communities too.
Mm-hmm.
So
because
it broke them down.
In the early 60s, and this will get us, don't worry, we'll get back in there.
Okay.
In the early 60s, there really was a legitimate, let's try to find more of an authentic culture. A lot of young people were trying to find a way to break away from what they considered a corporate controlled mind control sort of apparatus that was in the West. Many black people,
like Hegel. Would this be the same?
Yeah, but also Marcuse. They brought in something more than that. But the original beatnik meant Beatitudes. They wanted to kind of get back to Jesus's simplicity in the Beatitudes.
Like you're talking about the time of like the movie Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, you did have the Black Panthers who were not breaking laws. They were just a kind of a nationalist movement that felt like, let's help blacks to become great and to do all these kinds of wonderful things and become wealthy and that sort of stuff. Now, if you study COINTELPRO, that was when the FBI used to infiltrate all these groups.
Okay.
And then, just like many people say happened with January 6th, you had people instigating, like, January 6th, oh, go in there and start breaking stuff, and then you later find out, wait a minute, those were government informants, if not agents. So that helped to discredit things. And now you could say it was coincidence because the US government was funding LSD research in all the universities that had military contracts, which is pretty much all of them. People like Timothy Leary, I forget which university, it was MIT, Stanford, I don't remember which, it was one of those big universities. He became the guru. And he said, this was CIA facilitated. And the thing is that when you threw drugs into the movement, it destroyed the movement. And then later, Charles Manson, he was into drugs, stuff like that. When he was arrested, it destroyed the hippie movement because Charles Manson became the face of the counterculture. And then people started going, oh, wait a minute. And then they started pulling back from it. But yes, if you study LSD and the US government, you'll find that there is a strong connection. Now, this brings us into the idea that after World War II, there was a very strong effort to apply technocracy to society. And what I mean by technocracy is where everything's planned. Everything is facilitated. You saw Hollywood co-opted by the military. I mean, they didn't give up after all the propaganda movies in the 1940s. They stayed right there. Then you could create a new reality. Slowly. If you're going to change someone, you usually, on a mass scale, you do it slowly. But nevertheless, this is quite psychopathic because what you're saying is, I know better than everyone else. People are pawns in this game. And then you can lead them. Now, during the 50s, arguably up until the 60s, most of Hollywood and so forth was pretty traditional. You still had movies. I remember there was a Jerry Lewis movie where, oh my gosh, it was so pro-family. Of course, he was very pro-family. But it was, I mean, it may as well have been sponsored by the Mormon Church. I mean, it was so freaking pro-family. I just forget the name of it.
That's what I remember as a kid of the 80s and the 90s, is that so much like the Disney movies, everything was very wholesome. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I was asking my students this the other day, is there a point where colonization goes too far? Is there a point where or progress goes too far? Like, we've gotten to this point where it didn't matter that I'm a different color than you are teaching you. And now we're going backwards. Mm-hmm. And why, if it's all planned, would they have put us through this phase of relative peace, this like 30 years of relative peace and love and what I call the Sesame Street generation? Mm-hmm. Why would they put us through that to bring us to where we are now, where they're teaching you to hate other people?
It could be argued that maybe either A, that was the agenda all along, get people to slowly, I mean, if you think about, if you do watch older movies, my wife and I, she loves old movies, and you'll watch something from the late 60s and everything's kind of undercover, but there's still things you say, whoa, they're talking about what? It's like if you watch old cartoons from the 40s and 50s. Children love them, but the humor, you can see there's some dark stuff in there. Now, it could be argued that this was all planned, or it could be argued that you had a change. You had the old guard died off and were replaced with people that had gone to university after, for instance, the whole Frankfurt School influence, the whole Wilhelm Reich influence that brought us the sexual revolution. Now you can spend a whole show on that. Right. And all these other things that what what happened was the ones that took over after the old guard died, these people had been trained in a completely different manner. They set out to change the world in a more Marxist way, more so than like Wilhelm Reich. He wanted to break down religion using sexuality. In fact, in one case, he said, if you argue with a young woman on religion and try to break her belief in God, you can spend all day, it just won't work. She won't give up her values. If you pit her sexuality against her religion, you got her. Then she will resent her religion because her religion's telling her, you shouldn't be doing this. So he said, don't attack religion or social institutions. Get people in their basic cravings for what they want, and they'll do the rest. Now, I don't know if he would have gone as far as some of these things you saw in the 2020s with the pussy hat rallies and stuff like that. He was actually against homosexuality. He was against pornography. He felt like if you could break society down, because he believed the family was and religion connected to that was the basis of what he considered a fascist Western society, then they'll replace it, and then they'll just automatically readopt all the good values, but they'll be used for socialism. Now, the thing is, you could say that the genie's been let out of the bottle. It just is going to continue progressing. And I think there's people that want it to progress. Because as now we get back to civilization and its discontents, Freud warned that civilization exists because we repress our desires. We feel guilty for our shortcomings. If you lust after someone, most people will feel like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking these things. And they'll try to kind of block their mind. They'll sing a hymn or something. They'll try to get rid of it. But it's still there. But you got to keep it there. You got to keep sex. People think Freud was weird because he was talked about sex a lot. He was so far to the right that if he were to come back today, he would criticize Jordan Peterson for being too leftist. No joke. He was extremely conservative. His thing was he just wanted to explain it. And his worldview, basically, the psychoanalytic theory is sort of like Judaism without God.
Okay.
The id, which is all the bad desires, that's Satan. The superego, which is the great ideals, that's God.
So
the ego is
constant thinker. He was just a thinker who wanted to put the ideas out and let people. Yes,
but very conservative, extremely conservative. That's why his student, who was Wilhelm Reich, he hated him. Even though he was probably even a greater student than Carl Jung. But yeah, he didn't appreciate the fact that Reich believed in overturning Freudian theory in order to overturn society. Freud believed you raise a boy and a girl, they get married, they have babies, and they do the same thing, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Anatomy is destiny. 1,000 years from now, everyone will still be living this, even with all this technology, they'll still be boy, girl, get married, and so forth. Boy, did he not see what this era was.
So where is it that people have jumped in? Because that's really what I want to hit is, where is it that people have decided, first off, to buy this? And I would say buy the lie.
Okay. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that the first step in destroying a culture is to get people to hate their heritage. That's the first step. Because it gets rid of obligation. Okay, first of all, all Western society in many countries are worried about too low birth rates. Well, what's to be expected? That started in Germany when you were telling people, see, you're just as responsible for the Holocaust as the people that actually carried it out, even though you were born in the 80s or the 90s or in the 2000s. You're just as responsible. So a person starts feeling guilty, and like, why would you want to bring children into a world where they're going to feel that same guilt? Guilt, and this is people are going to freak out. They're going to say, is he a psychopath? No, I'm saying this. Guilt and excessive empathy are the tools of those who want to destroy traditional values.
Can I ask you a question on that? Wait, I need to clarify, because to me, the empathy that I see is virtue signaling.
Mm-hmm.
When you can go in to homes and chop off the heads of babies, or even not do that, but celebrate it here, and then say that you're the kind people.
Yep. That gets back to Freud, when in Civilization and Discontents, he says that what holds us back from killing our neighbor is essentially the sense of, you wouldn't want to do that. That would be a bad thing. But as Carl Jung noted, again, it was Freud's colleague more than student, sort of a double thing there. Jung noted, as did Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. Everyone thinks, well, he said God is dead. No, Nietzsche was saying that he was lamenting the fact that Western society had killed God. So if you kill God, that doesn't mean that just leaves people like without any burden of belief. It just means they'll follow anything. And that gets us, that was a perfect question you gave. That gets us back to the whole idea that people can manipulate guilt and empathy. So let's say we have, let's create a situation. Oh, we'll get back to Hamas. I'll get back to Hamas in just a second. But let's say we're talking about Antifa. Let's say we have Marsha. She's a really nice girl, comes from a nominal Christian home. Maybe they go to church on holidays and stuff. The parents aren't typically totally political. But she starts in school, she starts being told why she's evil. Because since she's white, she is responsible for slavery. Now, the teacher won't tell this girl that every culture on earth has participated in slavery. That won't be mentioned. It'll just be American culture. Now, you can talk about the same thing. The same thing goes on in countries like Norway. When you have left-wing teachers, the teacher will talk about colonialism, even though Norway was not colonial, unless you want to count the Viking era, which was hardly colonial. It was just people going out and colonizing and sometimes doing bad things in the process. But it wasn't colonialism as we know it today. So anyway, I forget the name I gave the girl. But anyway, she's being taught that Christianity has done bad things. They burned witches, not noting that America never burnt witches. There was one instance in Salem, Massachusetts, where there was some people hung, some of them men, and it had to do with some young girls. Originally, one of them having a crush on, I think it was the pastor in the congregation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it goes back. But the girl is taught that Christianity is bad. It's done all these bad things. She's taught that slavery existed and everything's based on race. And this is, and in a sense, this empathy she feels for the victims, which of course, if you see people thrown on ships and sent to America, that's a horrible thing. And you should feel a certain level of empathy. Like, what were they thinking? This must have been horrible for them, and so forth. But she's then told her empathy doesn't count unless she does something about it. Well, she can't go into a time machine and go back and rescue everyone on the ship. But now she can start feeling like she can rescue people in the general community. But the thing is, this guilt that she feels, this empathy that she feels, is then used by, I would contend, psychopathic leaders to them feel like the war has to be against everything traditional. It has to be against, they call themselves anti-fascist. But their definition of fascism is everything that they don't agree with.
And it's not the correct definition of fascism, which is
No.
that mix of business and government.
Yeah,
That's the
in that
correct
case,
definition.
China.
Yes.
China's the most fascist country on earth, where you do have a merger of government and business, but they don't understand that. And they'll find some dictionary definition that's changed in the last few years under political pressure.
Right.
To just say fascism is any sense of pride in your culture or ancestry or whatever, unless that pride.
Nationalism, basically, is what they're.
Yeah, it gets redefined as nationalism, even though nationalism could be argued originally was one of the ways that we brought people together.
Right.
The whole melting pot thing was nationalist.
Right.
You're an American. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Chinese, or whatever. Yeah. Well, Chinese after World War II, but you know what I mean? It was. Right. It didn't matter.
Yes.
It was a sense of unity that was brought in by nationalism. But no. Antifa people won't hear this, because you can then switch it around and use it against the values. And then when you do that, again, we're going to get back to Hamas. Don't worry. When you do that, then everything that she perceives as being part of her identity, remember Charles Manson, is now subject to critical thinking.
Critical
consciousness. And you may think it's crazy. Right? Huh?
Critical consciousness is the word.
Yes.
Today.
So this explains, and people, unless you study it, you study it, you'll find out I'm telling the truth. Many young women feel that, well, being physically fit is racist. Right. There's been articles out there how the racist origin, what was the title? It was in Time magazine, the racist origins of, or white supremacist origins of physical fitness, and
the same
crazy
thing with
stuff.
Being tidy, everything is, it comes down to everything is racist. But the thing is that critical consciousness, I just again learned this when preparing to teach my class. Critical consciousness is a direct quote from Marx. So and the thing, the personal is the political. Why people fall for these things is because Marx was above the bourgeoisie. His financial class, the class that he was from, was above this stuff. So they always look down at the other people and try to get those people to fight each other. Just like today, these people will fight each other. And I can't tell you how many people will accuse me of being hate-filled, or, just without knowing anything about the other person, because somebody up here told them to. Yeah, that's what I'm interested in finding out, is how do these kids, especially the kids, but also, I see people that are my age in their 40s who are also like, you're hate-filled, you're this, and you can't even reason with them anymore.
No. And it's just like the reason why I brought up Charles Manson, although hopefully most of these people don't go out and cut people up. By the way, Charles Manson didn't want to bloody his hands. He had other people do it for him. Right. Charles Manson never killed anyone. He was responsible, but he never hurt anyone himself. The thing that you can do, according to Freud here, Jung wrote about this too, is if you hijack their ego, then the people who threaten your new ego are now evil. Mao Zedong did this during the Cultural Revolution. He had people who got their own parents arrested or executed because the person, mostly young people, were convinced that they were fighting an evil. Antifa believes they're fighting evil. They're told they're fighting evil. They're told what is evil. So that's why I've seen pictures where Antifa will walk up and start beating on Black people, including cops, and calling them really nasty names, racial names. And you're thinking, wait a minute, here's some white guy who's getting in a fight with a black cop, calling him the racial names, because it goes beyond normalcy. These people that did the killings for Charles Manson, if you'd have met them before Charles Manson met them, you'd have thought these were really wonderful people. But Manson replaced their thinking apparatus. And this is what Hollywood's doing. This is what public schools are doing, and certainly in universities. And again, when I went to university, we had liberals, but they were for free speech. They just wanted equality. They just felt like society had not done enough for the poor. Right. Very traditional liberals, but they're all dead now. All those professors I had are dead. And they're replaced with these people who have been trained in the more radical thinking methods. And
I don't think, because when you had said that we could talk about the psychology of the left, I like to make a very clear distinction between the left and the far left, because there are a bunch of people who are kind of politically homeless, who are like, even going back to Hamas, even people who are saying, wait a second, BLM supports this, and they're just now getting shocked out of that place of, I am virtuous because I support all of these causes. And they're just now going, wait a second, this fundamentally does not align with who I am.
Right.
I'm about peace, not torture.
I will state right off, before anyone thinks you or I are anti-Muslim. Yes. You don't know how many times I have been told by Muslim people I've met, when they find out that I'm like pro-family and believe in God and all this stuff, especially in Europe, which, in Europe, believing in God's considered kind of weird if you're in Northern Europe. Not that they have any really firm foundation in how they believe. It's just they've been told, that's
they've
not
been told, I think is the
they've been told.
They've been told.
And that could get us into a whole new thing there, how they changed a very Christian area of Europe, that being Scandinavia, into what it is today.
Right.
But the thing is that, I've been told by many Muslims that, you should just convert to Islam. You're a Muslim, and you just don't understand it.
The values, yeah.
And I don't know one of them that would support what went on with Hamas.
Right.
But if you live in an area where everything told to you, and you can look on, there's a service called Memory TV where they play stuff with English subtitles, even cartoons played in Gaza, things like that. If you grow up feeling that Jews are responsible for as a collective, I mean, there's good Jews, there's bad Jews, all over the place. But if you're taught that Jews are the reason why everything on earth is bad, which they are, and then you're taught that the reason why your parents don't have anything and that you don't have a future is because Israel is blocking you. And then you're shown pictures of victims of bombings and so forth. This creates an us or them. Freud called it, which is kind of ironic when you talk about Jews and Arabs, because very genetically similar to each other, but it's called the narcissism of slight differences. It's like why Europeans hate Russians, because the Russians are very Christian now and conservative in those kinds of things. And so the Europeans are like, well, we hate Russia because they don't allow homosexuality for grade school and high school to be taught. Whereas in Arab countries, gay people can be men can be executed. But yet there's no problem with buying oil from those countries. But Russia, they're evil because they feel like, the Russians are they should know better because they look like us. They have the same customs. They have some different dances and a little bit different food, but essentially, I've been to Russia many times. It's like Europeans that speak Russian.
Yeah.
But Hamas and Israel, again, these people, they feel like should know better. They live in the same region. They look a little bit different. Not always, but I mean, ethnically, Arab is a term for a whole bunch of different types of people. You know, you can be blonde and be an Arab. I've met blonde Arabs. But the thing, and same with Jews, but the thing is that culturally you're told he wears a Star of David, she wears a Star of David. They're your oppressors. They're the ones who are evil. And then when an attack takes place, it's a collective responsibility.
Well, and this is why I asked you if you can be born, if you were born this way, or if you're trained to be this way, because I'm thinking of Russia and Ukraine, the Hutu and Tutsi, the Native Americans and the colonists, the Black versus white, the Christian versus queer. All of them are taught. If you put all of those as children in a nursery room, they can all be friends. They can all be best friends with each other if they grow up together and nobody interferes.
Oh yeah, I remember reading I was reading a story one time. A professor had hung it up on his door at university, and it was about, this happened, I guess, in the 1920s. A Jewish mother gave up her twins for adoption. She couldn't take care of them.
Yeah.
One was adopted by a Jewish couple, one by a German. One of the children had risen very high before Nazism was destroyed, had risen very high in the Nazi party. The other one had been oppressed by the Nazi party. They were twins. So that illustrates exactly what you're saying, that people have to be taught. And that goes back, just a real quick thing on the psychopathy. Yes, you're born with psychopathy, but it's the way you're raised will determine whether you're this emergency room doctor saving lives or you're the guy burying someone in your basement.
Wow.
Okay, that's what makes the difference. So ultimately, it is society that directs people. Most of these young Antifa people you're talking about, had they been raised in a situation in which they had not been told that everything about their identity was wrong, and therefore to atone for all the wrongness, they must destroy that entity which has made them this way, that being society.
Can I push back a little bit on that? Because I feel like there are a lot of parents who've been blindsided. They thought that they were teaching their kids traditional values. And I'm not talking about like marriage between a man and a woman. I'm just talking about being a decent human being who believes in hard work. Meanwhile, they don't understand why their kids living in the basement and getting stoned and then going out and protesting. Yeah. So I feel it's not always that they were raised by bad people, right?
No, most of the parents, how do you put this?
I think
most of the parents of these Antifa people,
go ahead.
I think most of the parents would never have wanted their kids to wind up like that, but they didn't deal with, like when I said that if you study history, you understand the context. There is a way that you can look through the New Testament and prove that Jesus was a white supremacist. It would be really easy. For instance, when someone grabbed his cloak and she wasn't a Jew, and he actually referred to, he referred to her as a dog or something.
Well, he said even the dogs, or she said even the dogs get scraps.
Yes. Now, so you could easily say that Jesus was a white supremacist, which critical race theory does say that if you are a believer in the salvation gospel, and it doesn't matter whether you're fundamentalist, Protestant, Catholic, or Mormon, or whatever, then you can't be an anti-racist, because you have to see Jesus and his mission as one of liberation, not as salvation.
And I think that we are getting close to our end, but I do think that is the point in why liberation is always the goal. And when people think of liberation, they think their chains are set free, but that's not what this liberation is. In fact, this liberation will chain people up more.
Oh, absolutely. Most revolutions eat their young. If you wound up with a revolution in the United States that they would love to have, they would be the first victims. That happens. Stalin purged almost everyone that had brought Lenin to power in the first place. Before his death, he was going to purge the rest of them. And that's why there's theories
they mentally can't turn it off when they've been taught, when they've been sowed the seed of resentment that's constant, and they're told literally, you need to find your oppression everywhere and work to dismantle every system of it.
Yes.
Well, so you get rid of us, you get rid of the kind of reasoned, old-fashioned, just like, leave me alone, don't tread on me type of people.
And one of the reasons why Freud was so depressed in his life was because he realized, in essence, he used World War I as his example, but he realized in essence that what you see, and a lot of times they're not shared on the main news, but if you've seen some of the videos of the victims of Hamas recently, he realized that these Antifa people are capable of doing exactly the same thing in America. There's a really good, you should watch it sometime. There's a very good movie on YouTube. It's in English subtitles. It's called The Checklist. I can send you a link to that.
Yes, please do.
And it talks about what they did to people under Lenin. You know, Lenin's presented as the nice guy. Yeah, Stalin went a little overboard, but Lenin, he was the nice communist. No, he just didn't have as much time as Stalin. Right. But in The Checklist, it shows how they turned executions into like an industrial method. And I've been to some of these places. I know that it's telling the truth. They'd go to they'd find a monastery where they had really thick walls so they could execute people so the villagers wouldn't hear the gunshots. I mean, by the tens of thousands. And that's what they would do. You just find a place where it was muffled and they just kill people in mass. But the leaders, it showed, these are supposed to be the NKV, I think they were called the secret police at that time. That's why they call it the checklist. We go through a list, you know, Marsha Ivanova, kill, so kill, and not even read the accusations. It's just they're on the sheet. They must be bad. If you came across someone that maybe you knew and you knew, nah, not this one, just jail. Kill, and it's a brutal movie. It's a brutal movie, but
it's also not that far off. When people look at you, so we've got Hamas, which is just a disaster, and I am not even. Here's the thing: I'm pro-human, and I know that there are civilians who are being destroyed. Period, and that just I don't understand the cruelty in the world. That's where I stand on all of this.
It's ego projection.
Praising, coming in on parachutes and destroying, killing kids is hard for me to even say. Okay. And the revenge that's going to come to the people who aren't guilty is also hard for me to even say. But
absolutely.
We're not that far away from it when you look at your neighbor and you just say, oh, Trump supporter.
Exactly.
And you diminish them because their values are different than your own.
This is gonna sound. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
There's a movie called The Purge, but I think it may or may not be based on an old Star Trek from the 60s. You may have seen it.
Okay.
There was one where they land on a planet and there's a computer. I think it was called, my memory, I still have it after seeing it as a kid,
Okay.
called Landau or something like that. And the people are really nice during the day. The computer has some sort of connection to their brain. But then because they're so nice during the day, you have to let it loose. So at night, they go completely berserk.
Yeah.
Rape, pillage, all these things. And then when the computer switches program, they become nice again. And this is how it really works, because it's ego projection. If when the lights go out in a big city and people start stealing computers and TVs and stuff, that's an ego projection. I'm no longer me who has been taught that stealing is bad. I'm now part of the group. And the group says stealing is good, because there's, you're not dealing with the whole internalized guilt. You're saying that, well, that doesn't count because now I'm part of a group.
I also think there's a high to it. There's like a high, like a drug, because what I saw with Antifa was kids who would sleep all day in Seattle. They would sleep all day, and they could only come to a counter protest if it was in the afternoon. So we realized we needed to make our rallies in the morning.
Ingenious.
They couldn't wake up to come. And then they would go to these things and they would turn them, they'd bring their big drums and they would scream and yell and spit and become very savage. And then afterwards, it was drugs and sex.
Yeah.
And then they would repeat. And it's so incredibly
Charles Manson?
Savage. It's savagery. It is the very barbarian.
Yeah. And this is what Freud warned about. Carl Jung warned about it. I know Jordan Peterson warns about it today. Yeah. It is this idea that if we think about the witch trials, and I'm not going to talk about the witch trials that took place in Salem, that was small scale.
Right.
But the ones that took place in Europe.
Yes.
Or some villages in Switzerland, I think it was, there was no women left over the age of like 10.
Wow.
Yeah, because they just went into this hysteria. And it's just like, okay, she's a witch. She did this. She's a witch. And they killed them. You see stonings. I've seen videos of stonings in places like Afghanistan. And you're realizing this is a small village. The woman that's being stoned, that her cousins, childhood friends, and maybe even brothers and father are throwing rocks too. Because it's part of a group identity now.
Right.
Antifa is a group identity. Conservatives don't understand this because conservatives value the idea that they are individual thinkers.
Right.
And they don't understand the power of the group. You're talking about, I didn't know a thing about the sex parties and stuff like this for Antifa, but again, that's Charles Manson. There
were many, especially young men, who didn't buy into it at all, but it was an orgy afterwards. So, hey,
Yeah, so you're getting a reward. It's just like in World War II, to break soldiers' resistance to going in and massacring Chinese victims, the Japanese would use a technique of showing a rape, raping a woman right in front of the crowd, and then giving the soldiers sake as a reward, because you associate, again, something that you would consider evil. Your mom never told you to do that, but now you're getting a reward. And sexuality is a huge reward, especially for many of these young men who essentially, I would say most of them are what we call today incels.
Yes. So we need to go, just because it's almost time to close down, but what's the solution? How do you, so they're not psychopaths because they weren't born this way. They were made. So how,
not necessarily leaders. If they're leaders, they probably are.
Yes. But the kids, and then that's all I could think of is these young people who did what they did and who are now being celebrated. And especially these kids in America who are praising them. What's the hope for them?
That's called deprogramming. And in that sense, no, it's true. It's a cult.
Yeah.
When
I'm just
you're,
laughing because Hillary Clinton just said that every conservative should be deprogrammed. And
yeah.
so I just am like, so
And the scary part is Hillary, on the scale of Democrats today, would be considered conservative. I mean, on the scale today. The thing is that I've heard of some people who, for instance, if we're going to go into the gender thing,
yeah,
parents that have been the most successful are the ones that don't play the game.
yeah,
Now, the girl may really complain. She cuts her hair short. She's talking about she's going to get her breast removed, or I've heard of cases where some of them want to become, what was the term? Non-sexual, meaning that you have your ovaries and
okay. Everything.
uterus and breast removed so that you're completely non-sexual.
Yeah.
And the parents just continue calling them. If her name's Nancy, they don't call her Fred or something. They just say, okay, Nancy, and it irritates them. But if you start calling her Fred, you're playing the game, and she will do it. If you don't play the game, they won't. And things I've seen in my own family when I had, kids that have started kind of veering, because you can't help it. They're going to veer a little bit this way.
Sure.
You note the reality. You might say, oh, yeah, if they say something about oppression, you can turn around and say, yeah, I agree. The rich people have been oppressing poor people. And they'll say, no, they'll change it to race. And I'll say, oh, so you don't agree that the rich people are the ones that are actually in control? And you start getting them those questions because you're trying to break the programming. If you just argue and say, how can you say that? You're
Yeah.
blonde and blue-eyed and are you an oppressor? Well,
Right.
They're going to be like, oh, no, because I'm actually fighting it. No, you start asking them the questions. Just say, what would happen to you if you went into an exclusive gated community in California? Would you be arrested? And when they have to say, well, yeah, because I'm not a member of that. What if you are Black and you have a home there? Are you going to be arrested? Well, no. These are little, you have to continue, make it subtle. If you've got a child that's starting to veer that way, make it subtle. Getting in the face is just good. You get in an argument, you shut down the cerebral cortex. And now it's all, you're just arguing on an animal level.
Now, here's the thing. A lot of them are being taught that, and I've had people say, I know we don't agree, so I will not engage, and physically turn their back. Even though they're the ones who come to our events, like if I'm speaking at something,
and that's when, and again, I'm just using the technique of deprogramming. That's when you say, and that's why I think you're a really good person. And suddenly that's going to click. If there's anything left of their conscience, which I think most of them are reachable. I've known people who, when I went to university, that were hardcore left wing, and something happened, and all of a sudden you meet them later, and what? You're married with 4 kids, and you're a Mormon.
Tell me this: do you believe that there are kids who are cheering because they're with their groups, and then they go home at night and they're crying into their pillows because of how ugly the whole thing is?
Yeah, because they're disconnected. We've destroyed every connection that young people have. They're supposed to not feel connected to religion. Okay, that was something leadership has done, not us. It's been, media, education. So they've been
those earbuds in all the time, right?
Yes, that cuts them off from reality. They've been cut off from family because we've turned family into an economic arrangement rather than a spiritual arrangement. They're cut off from their heritage because whereas you or I may have watched films that showed George Washington as this wonderful man who saved the nation, they've grown up seeing movies in which some poor Black guy rides into town, if it's a Western, and all these guys try to kill him.
Right.
That's society for them. That it's like, History has turned it to where, you only show a small segment of history, but you overblow it.
So I feel like the way that we fix this is, as you were quoting Alexander Solzhenitsyn earlier, we refuse to live by the lies. So we create
Mhm.
as many opportunities as we can to have as many conversations as we can with these people, and we do not react with hatred. Even if that means the only thing that you can do is step back and walk away, you cannot react with hatred to the students. You have to show them by maybe by love. I don't know if love is the right word, but
It doesn't have to be,
visually show them compassion.
yeah. It doesn't have to be love. Try this out sometime. Anyone listening to this, if you're in an argument online, be it Facebook or anywhere else, and someone makes a huge point about something, I don't care what the issue is, if it's a left-wing argument, start out by saying, try find one little thing within what they've said and said, by reading this, you and I agree on this. And that's why I do have respect for you. I have Democrats in my social media. We don't hate each other because I do tend to try to say, I understand why you feel this way. So, let's, as the Bible says, let's reason together. Because otherwise, the fighting, this is what they want. This validates them. And
Yes.
Antifa, they love it if some Trump supporter comes up and says, I'm going to bust your face in, because that gives them justification to bust the face in of a Trump supporter at another event. Now, they won't choose the big guy who's 6'5" and looks like he works out every day that just threatened him. They'll choose the 55-year-old 5'2" woman who has a Trump button on. They'll choose her. But the thing is, don't hit them with hate, hit their ideas with hate. And
I even think hit their ideas with reason.
Yes.
I think that that's more important than, I can understand the draw to hit with hate, but I think we have to look at them as being sick. They're brainwashed, and
if we don't try to convert them, then eventually I think we're going, it only takes, and again, turning back to Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, if society collapses, and that doesn't have to mean everyone goes into a revolution. The thing that keeps your neighbor from going after you is a paycheck.
Right.
Okay. I mean, everyone can you can hate your neighbor. They could be the worst person on earth, but if they get up early in the morning, get in their car and drive off to work, and you do too, then you don't have time to threaten that. But if the economy would collapse, if a war would take place in which social cohesion would die, that's when you will be fighting. And in those kind of cases, you mean be fighting people that you agree with. I mean, talking about a Walking Dead.
I think that the fall, so many times I look at the people and I think, as James Lindsay says, that if you win, you lose. And if we win, you lose. And that's really the case for these kids, these college kids. If you win, you are on the chopping block. We may be first, the gulags may be filled with us first, but after, or execution, but after us, they are not going to allow the disruption. They are not going to allow the hatred. They only want those who will be obedient and compliant.
Yeah, and
that's not these guys.
I know we have to wrap up here soon, but I was just going to bring this up as a point. Everyone's like, I want to win. I want to win. I want to win. I want to win. But I don't know. I've heard about this letter for years and years and years that allegedly was it was on display somewhere in England, one of the universities, from Albert Pike. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
Very, very famous Freemason, who allegedly predicted World War I, World War II, and World War III. Now, again, I don't know if it's legitimate or not, but he said World War III would be the war that would pit Christianity against Islam. and that it would shatter both. But then something would happen in which the left would have a period in which they would be able to go full scale on their social agenda. Now, this is what's interesting, because that's hard to predict what's going on today if this has been going around for years and years and years. So that's maybe like, well, if he didn't write it, someone sure had some accurate insight into the future. But they would take things so far that society would literally, and I mean this in the Stalin sense, purge atheist and leftist. They would wipe them out. Now, of course, it then says that it would be replaced with a perfect Luciferian society. You know, so people would get so fed up with, I mean, the excesses. Maybe not now. Today we think about gender identities and all this Antifa stuff. And I've heard conservatives say, you know, if things fall apart, I'm coming after these guys. And I think this, you gotta remember, if this is an agenda, and I'm not saying it is, but if this is a far-reaching agenda, something bigger than what most people understand, then the agenda is not for Christianity to win. The agenda is not for necessarily traditional families in the sense of being connected to religion to survive. The agenda is for what, for no better way of describing it, is Luciferianism to survive.
I believe the agenda is for global control.
Yeah.
For certain people on the very top to rule everyone else. For the rest.
Oh
of
my
us
gosh,
to be
techno-feudalism.
Useless class. Okay, Michael, it is time for me to wrap up because I'm going to go pick up my kid.
Okay, that's fine.
I really appreciated speaking with you. And perhaps we will do this again and continue the conversation. Where can people follow you if they are?
Oh, just come. Okay. The best place right now, and again, if anyone's a publisher, you know, I mean, I'm going to start self-publishing if I have to, but maybe I'm a little bit lazy. I'd like to have someone that would, even if I have to share profits. But for now, they can reach me either through if they can find my Facebook page and send me something under Micheal Cross. I'm trying to think of the picture I have there. Yeah, I just got a picture of myself on an aircraft carrier. I visited one time. There's a lot of Micheal Crosses, but the best place to actually get some connection would be to come to my YouTube channel. And it's Micheal Cross, and in that one, oh gosh, now I'm looking like militaristic, and I'm not. I'm like in front of a helicopter with a gun in the picture. And there's a picture from one of my books that's of a young woman with this kind of psychopathic stare on the top. But I have a lot of interviews I did a few years ago with actual psychopaths, pro-social psychopaths, be it a law professor, a university professor, a businessman now who's a psychology professor. I got interviews with people on the issue of politics and narcissism, or politics and psychopathy, as well as just stuff on society in general. And I'd really like it if people would come to my YouTube channel and just hit subscribe.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, you have a good day there.